Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. And today, Bobby is going to be talking with Joy Beland. Joy is the Vice President of MSPs for the Protection of Critical Infrastructure. And today we're going to be talking about her objective and their mission. We are so excited that you guys are joining us for today's episode, and we hope that you enjoy.
I have to say, you were one of a handful of MSPs that jumped into CMMC right away. I mean, I remember like 3 years ago when I first presented on this is the opportunity and the challenge that MSPs are facing. And you were like in the front of the room and signed up right away for the CCP course so that you could better understand. And you know, that's a 5-day boot camp and the exam is like, I think it's 4 hours. So no one should take that lightly. The investment that you made right away, starting off with this. And you're exactly the kind of MSP that we want to know about everything we're trying to do with the MSPs for the protection of critical infrastructure. We pulled this organization together. It's a nonprofit, and the founding partners are Summit 7, Neo Systems, and Qzara. So Neo Systems and Summit 7 are MSPs. We happen to be based in the Huntsville area.
So technically competitors, right?
Oh, very much so.
Right.
Very much so. A lot of the same types of service offerings. Qzara is a MSSP, and they're based out of the DC area. Okay. And, you know, we came together because we kept running into the same challenges and also in the same environments. You know, whenever there's a CMMC related conference or major unveiling of something new in the program, all three of us had our hands in there trying to figure it out. And we realized that with the amount of changes that are coming and the lack of understanding at the DoD and the Cyber AB about what an MSP or MSSP truly is, how they perform those security capabilities on behalf of their clients, how much of the defense industrial base is actually impacted by the services of a MSP. You know, outsourced IT security in any form is coming into scope here. And so what we wanted to do is be able to come together as one voice, align in what we think the view should be on a handful of given topics, and try to provide and influence those decision makers give them the right information for them to make a solid and informed decision. So we represent industry in this regard. And it is a very big undertaking. You're right. I think that we're up to almost 10 MSPs that have signed on with us. And we have a lot of work to do. And we all, as you know, we all have full-time jobs.
Right.
But this is going to impact, I would look at it well beyond the impact to the MSP industry and the MSSP industry. This is going to impact the entire supply chain for the Department of Defense, which impacts thousands, hundreds of thousands of small businesses across the United States. So what we do or don't do is going to be felt nationwide, right?
It's I was shocked when I went through the CCP class because, like you said, it's a 5-day course, and I would go for a walk after each day. And I think every day I walked about 5 miles because I was seeing what seemed like almost an insurmountable objective that was being laid out for managed service providers. When NIST was adopted as the standard for CMMC for that framework, the NIST 800-171, it makes a lot of sense for larger companies. But when I saw how it was outlaid for small businesses, and then I started thinking to myself, well, if I supported them, how would I do this?
Yeah.
And I had so many question marks, so many things that I didn't understand and I didn't know. And I was really blown away at the large challenge that was. And when I heard that you guys were doing this initiative, I guess my first potential concern I had was, well, is this the Summit 7 show? But you guys are bringing in other organizations to get buy-in and understanding. And when I started talking with you guys, it's very clear the passion that you have for what you're trying to accomplish. And that made me feel like, okay, but more than that, you were talking about some of the challenges that you're trying to help as we come together to accomplish. And those were the same challenges that I had myself. Can you speak to some of those challenges that, like, specifically as being a partner with this organization, how that's going to help align?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing directly for MSPs, first and foremost, is for us to have a voice and put forward a guiding document on how an MSP should be assessed. And to back that up one step, in the initial regulation and documentation between the DFARS 252, 204, 7012 clause, and then the Cyber AB putting forward any kind of scoping or assessment guidance. Initially, everything on it said if you have an external service provider, and they lumped us all in with the cloud service providers that are like Microsoft Government Cloud and AWS and Google, that you had to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. And, there's a huge problem in that. I think that Qzara is the only security provider I know, managed security provider, that is at that level, FedRAMP. Right. And because they're serving on government contracts already, and they had the ability afforded to them because they were being contracted directly in that way to go through that FedRAMP program. But it was that is an extremely expensive endeavor. And, a 5-person team can't do something like that. They'll just never get there to that kind. And it's actually not a fit at all for a managed service provider. And so in some leaked documents that we saw come out a couple of months ago, once the DoD finally gave their overhaul of the CMMC program to the Office of Management and Budget, specifically OIRA, and they were doing their normal processes, they accidentally posted supporting documents for what all these revisions would include on the public internet. It was taken down a day later. But what we all saw is that there's now a new initiative, thank goodness, that they've scaled it back from being FedRAMP moderate or equivalent required for an MSP to an MSP needing to come in with a certification themselves at the same level of the customers that they are providing those capabilities to. For the bulk of the MSP community that has a client in the defense industrial base, that will mean CMMC level 2, which is 110 controls currently included in the current version of NIST 800-171, which is R2. And it's a lot deeper than that, as you know, that with all the different assessment objectives and what have you. But even that for an MSP, and some MSPs will have to be CMMC level 3, requiring the additional NIST 800-172 capabilities that have been tagged specific to the CMMC program. But the majority, 98%, that want to go for this would be CMMC level 2. How they get scoped for that assessment is going to greatly impact what kind of resources they're putting towards this. And that's the first and the most important thing that I personally am tackling on the part of the collective. And we're going through a draft process of what does this document include, what would be included at an MSP or an MSSP. What are the different categories of assets? Because none of us are going to have CUI assets unless we happen to store, process, or transmit CUI in our own environments. Now, some MSPs may back up their client data that contains CUI to their own cloud, MSP provided storage, whatever. And so that would pull them in as a CUI asset. Most of them don't, though. Right? Most of them just perform the service capabilities. So that's one area of many that we're looking.
Or if you are doing the backup and you do FIPS validated encryption and make sure before it ever leaves the system, now you have it in a format that is at least accessible or appropriately encapsulated by the standard, right? when you're taking that data and you're backing it up. Just trying to figure out where you're going to put it, that type of data, and where it's sitting. First trying to understand those standards and how you're trying to leverage that. I think that goes to speak just from the backup perspective. That talks about scoping, right? About how me as a 13-person managed service provider can try to not only make sure that I'm going to get level 2, but how am I going to scope my connection to my client?
Yeah.
And take into consideration things like, okay, FIPS validated backups that are being sent off site. How do you do that? How are you not jeopardizing the client? How are you not jeopardizing yourself in that whole process? And there isn't a blueprint in our book that you can just go read that explains how you're going to do all that. This is a major challenge to try to accomplish. And for me as an MSP, when I went through the course and I went through the training and I went looking at all this stuff, I felt relatively confident that with given enough time and effort, I could create an environment that I could pass a level 2. But it was a different story when you start thinking about then how can you leverage that to support your clients? How can you do that and then not waste all your time?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And frankly, what you're speaking to is the road that a lot of the C3 PAOs took. So these assessor firms that were assessed by the defense, by DIBCAC,
right.
The DoD's own cybersecurity assessment team, a lot of them created an enclave with GCC High, and they said, all right, well, since we don't have CUI, we're going to represent what it would look like if we had CUI, how we would tag it, how we would access it, who would have access to it. And they went through the CMMC level 2 assessment themselves with DIBCAC, all with a proposed data flow for what that might look like, and all based on data. Frankly, Bobby, that is a lot of Office documents, PDFs, like these are the assessment reports that they're treating like their CUI, that kind of stuff, maybe hashed artifacts or something that may come into their environment, but they aren't performing service delivery capabilities out of that enclave.
It's a different world.
They're not using it for level 1, level 2 technicians, password, capturing and rotation and privileged access management and RMM tools and EDR management, vulnerability scanning. Everything an MSP does is completely different from a assessor scenario, which, by the way, is completely different from a manufacturer in the supply chain that has to show how they handle their CUI. Like, we're 3 different animals. Right. We're completely different animals here. And so that has to be taken into consideration. And what we want to avoid, a few things. First of all, having a bar set so high or a scoping guidance pushed down that is so unattached to how a MSP would actually do their service delivery that nobody knows how to pass, nobody knows how to assess it, right? And that just kills all the MSPs in the supply chain. The second thing we want to avoid is, let's say that it does come through and it's understandable, but it's such a huge lift that the amount of MSPs currently who have clients in the defense industrial base shrinks down to 10% of them who are willing to invest the money and the time to adhere to all of the requirements. That may be completely unavoidable. We don't know, but can we not start down a path that will keep enough of us in this that have true skin in it, that can absolutely protect this data the right way, that the whole system doesn't break because of the MSPs, right? But there's some other things too that I just want to make sure that we're able to touch on that are positions of the collective that are important for us to have more voices weigh in on. Right? Is it okay for me to go through a couple of those and then we can circle back for the what's happening with the scoping? Excellent. First of all, being mindful, what's happening with CMMC and NIST 800-171 right now, this is imposed regulation by the Department of Defense, but there's at least 14 government agencies that are being tasked with adhering to 32 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, and will have NIST 800-171 imposed throughout their supply chain in varying ways. All those other agencies are watching what happens with the DoD's handling of this. And so the opportunity, being mindful, could be spread well throughout the critical infrastructure and other government agencies, not just the DoD. Okay. So first of all, the minimum qualifications and standards for MSPs, that part of that is the scoping, but what other things? Are they required to have a CCP on staff? Is there something about, personnel or background checks that we would want to establish as a baseline? The next thing that we'd like to focus the lens on is the RPO certification that's out there in the ecosystem. As you know, the Cyber AB has pointed to the RPO entity as the organization's most qualified to help a organization that needs to be assessed get ready for that. They say, if you want implementation advice, if you want to understand how to do this, go to the RPOs. Bobby, tell me, how much confidence would you have in some of the RPOs that you've met as to their capabilities to actually get a customer ready?
I'm pretty passionate about that. So I will control the passion and just say not much and just leave it at that.
So the hardest part about that is that the Cyber AB set up an ecosystem that had no qualification other than their ability to pass a very high level regular business background check and write a check for a lot of money. But there isn't actually any validation of their skills or their capabilities. Now there is on the assessor side, but there is not on the implementer side. And
I've just seen so much snake oil in that area that just really sickens me sometimes. And sadly, I'll be honest, I've been bit by it some. In my journey of trying to get ready, there's been situations where I was like, I kind of got taken advantage of that. And I would hate to see people go through the hard knocks. And that's one of the things that really, I feel that this initiative also can help in, is helping people start setting those bars, right? Of where you need to be to participate in that system. To try to help
that is something that we're looking at. And by the way, I want to be really clear. There are RPOs out there that have killer skills. I would even say, I go to the extent of saying there are people that are registered practitioners working for an RPO and people that have zero title whatsoever that are more skilled than some of the assessors. Sure. Right?
I've seen them.
By and large, that represents a very small percentage of the RPOs that are out there. So we'd like to see some meaningful qualifications for those people who are doing that type of advising. And I think that that's going to level up the MSP community, because MSPs will likely easily be able to meet that criteria and have a meaningful RPO designation if they so chose to, right? The next thing is some of the congressional appropriations. Now, this is a big one, and I'm not doing this in any particular order, but it's something we're really passionate about. And frankly, it costs a lot of money. But there is a lot of money out there being earmarked for cybersecurity, for small businesses, and for the defense industrial base. But there hasn't been anything put into writing, any movement behind, put your money where your mouth is. And so what we'd like to do is make sure that the ones who need it most, meaning the small businesses that are in the supply chain, actually get some of that money. And how would that look or benefit also the MSP community that's supporting those businesses? So we have varying levels of membership, and the highest level of membership that you saw actually requires a pretty big infusion of money into this fund that we have, where we've actually secured lobbyists to help us with this. And so that's another part of it, and some ideas. that we have is like maybe once a small business passes their CMMC level 2 assessment and is eligible for contract award, that they either receive some kind of a grant from the government or a tax benefit that would help them to pay for the services of the MSP who helped them get there, and maintain that on an ongoing basis, right? They have to maintain that cybersecurity posture. And then the scoping is the other thing that we really are focused in on, that we started the conversation with. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that there's other areas we are focused on, and we're dividing into some committees, and we really want to have people weigh in on this in a meaningful way so that we can put it forward. And before we continue on any other scoping questions, I just want to point out that we've been meeting and are continuing to meet with the advisory group that represents the C3PAO forum. And that is the forum put together of people who are in the assessment community, actively out there doing assessments right now under joint surveillance on the organizations that need to be assessed. And they need to understand and endorse the way that our industry is saying we'd like to be assessed, because they're the ones we would propose that would do the assessments, right? So if they align with us and we're able to put forward a document saying this is everything that our industry wants to have scoped in as part of what's the MSP assessment look like, and co-authoring that or with a stamp of approval is the C3PAO forum, then we've done something pretty fantastic for this whole initiative.
That's huge. I want to repeat that back because I want to make sure that I'm saying this right. But you guys are talking as the community, right?
Yeah.
To the assessors who are actually eventually going to be in the trenches providing those certifications and validations, talking to them about the challenges we have and attacking them. Maybe attack is an aggressive word, but communicating the challenges as an MSP, and how they can be appropriately assessed, because as much as they try to in this organization keep consistency across the viewpoints, there's individuals who are assessors who may have ranging perspectives and how they might wish for things to be done. So what you're saying is you guys are going to be looking at it from an MSP perspective about trying to create fairness in that assessment process and try to help maybe cast vision about some of that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And honestly, as much as we think we know as MSPs and implementers, the assessor community brings such fabulous, important perspective to, well, what would work and what wouldn't, and what are some of the caveats or the interpretations that we need to consider as assessors.
Right.
So there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to 100% align with them, but we already have moved the mark on both of our sides substantially to understand each other. And they did put a paper out a couple years ago saying how they would assess an MSP.
I saw that.
They admitted it's a couple years old. It really needs to be refreshed. And I think that in these conversations, we may not end up aligning 100%, but we're going to have a lot of crossover. And that's going to be the most important thing coming forward, is our industry in front of the DoD and the Cyber AB.
So as a member, when you come in, you touched on there's sort of different levels, right? Based on the organizational size. Me being a 13-person organization, I went ahead and submitted my application.
Excellent.
And
thank you, Bobby.
Yeah. But one of the things that you showed me, which I think is really important and you touched on, but I think it's probably worth repeating, is that the engagement has some different things, but the levels also have. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself in your discussion path that you're having. Can you touch on that a little bit more about those differences?
Yeah. So the highest level member is going to be a $30,000 membership annually, and that's what's helping pay for our lobbying firm. We have a really fantastic lobbying firm. They 100% understand our issues and our mission, and they have regular meetings with us and let us know who all they're meeting with and come back for more information. So it's a highly collaborative, really great thing. Those members of our collective would have the opportunity to actually vote on these issues because we're a fully functioning board. We put things forward for votes, determine if we're moving forward. And so right now, a lot of the things I'm talking to you about are in draft format, and we're baking them for votes, right? They would hold an office. They would have a representative at every monthly meeting. They would be invited to an annual event that we will be having in Washington, D.C.
Oh, cool.
So those are just some of the benefits. There's many that are on the membership descriptions on our website. And the next level down, as an associate member, this is likely where most of the MSPs are going to want to join us because they honestly, they still are going to be able to have a lot of influence and input as to all of these different decisions that we're trying to make. They simply won't have the vote on it. But I think that we're well represented also with a bunch of competitors holding those voting positions.
Right.
The associate position is $2,500 per year.
Right.
So they wouldn't have a vote. They would be able to hold an office, but they would be able to come to the meetings, have access to the recordings of the meetings. They'd be invited to the annual event in DC. As such. And then anybody that's not an MSP or MSSP, so maybe the vendor community, maybe people in the insurance industry or the legal industry who feel like they really want to be abreast of what we're doing and help to guide in one way or another. We certainly are not going to open those seats up for voting because we don't want to be impacted by anybody outside of our industry in a voting scenario. But we'd love to have them as a special member, and that's $500. So that's some of the benefits of some of the things that we're offering. But then on the other side, what I think you were also alluding to is that you wouldn't even qualify for some of these unless you meet certain criteria.
Right. Certifications, experience, things like that.
Yeah. And when we were baking this out, this was a hard conversation to have because we want to be inclusive, but we also want to make sure the people who are weighing in on these things have skin in the game.
Right.
And are moving in a meaningful way with the right motives in mind. Right. So this is about protecting our critical infrastructure. That's why we named the collective this, right? So they have to be an RPO at the highest level.
Right.
They have to have at least 2 CCAs or a combination of 1 CCA and 1 RPA. So
that's the higher level, right? Is what you're referring to.
At the highest level.
Right.
Yeah. To have a voting position, and 75% of the revenue has to come from the defense industrial base.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. So if they have just a small, if it's like, there's some huge, this is the reason for that. There's some huge MSPs out there that may have a lot of defense industrial base clients, but it only really represents 10 or 15% of their revenue. And all of their other revenue is focused on completely different frameworks, other industries or verticals that has nothing to do with the DIB. We want the majority of the revenue to come from the DIB. At the next level down, the associate that is $2,500 a year, you only need to have 5% of your revenue derived from the DIB, right? And that represents most of the MSPs who only have 1, 2, or 3 clients in the DIB, but they love those clients and they don't want to let them go. They have a vested interest in what happens with this, the initiative as we move forward. They have 1 CCP, 1 RPA, or 1 RP on their team. They don't have to be registered as an RPO, though. And I think that's going to really resonate with the majority of the MSPs out there. So we want those.
That's where I signed up. That's where I went. And I'd like to share why I did that.
Please.
And the reason why I did it, for some specific things. I mean, I think the lobbying is a key aspect, but that's the long game. Like we need to start now because we're not going to be able to turn some of these things quickly. It's going to take concerted effort. So we need to have that. So that's really important. And I want to be a part of that. The second, and probably the most important thing for me, the reason why I signed up, is the challenges. Even the larger organizations like, I'm not Summit 7. You guys, what, 150 plus people? I mean, you majority of what you guys do, and as the others organizations you did, I'm not that, not yet. The reason why I say not yet is because I think a lot of these MSPs that are getting into the community now, that are taking this very serious and are trying to be involved in the community and trying to understand what this ecosystem really is about, you need to get in. Summit 7 and these other organizations have been doing it for a lot longer than I have. They've got a tremendous amount of experience, a lot of resources. And if I can sit in these meetings and start listening to what the challenges you guys are facing and start understanding more and start participating and getting, some of those perspectives about how to do scoping and other things, that is a big win for me to have knowledge-wise, to learn. And I want to be a part of something like that. And right now, I only have 2 clients. You nailed it, the number on how many clients that someone might start. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg for us. We want to continue to grow that client base. And if I have somebody that I'm a fellow member of that I can communicate with to understand what that looks like as I go to grow, and I can communicate and talk with and see how others are doing it and have communication on those lines, that's huge. That is just such a massive deal for me. And to be able to come to a conference and have other people that are fighting the same challenges and have conversations as peers and shoulder to shoulder on stuff is just, that's a massive deal for me to have that potential insight and connectivity. And that was, I think, a big reason why I wanted to sign up for that, as well as I think some of the clarity on the other things that you were talking about. I think those were, that was a big tipping point, because when I first started hearing you guys talking about it, I thought, man, I'm going to have to be at the Summit 7 size before I could participate in that organization. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, I think that would represent 98% of the MSPs out there that have a few clients in the DIB, like everything that you just said, are definite benefits for this. Yeah.
So in the collaboration aspect, is there more insight that you can share, Joy, from what that would look like? You talked about trying to have some more pointed conversations of what you would want to see MSPs doing in the space. So how could you maybe shed some more light on how the collaboration between those members would look like, and then how would you moving the agenda of them participating moving forward is going to be like? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
It does. So I think that we need a lot more voices to help guide the shaping of what are we going to put forth as recommended requirements for the RPO organizations. I think that the conversation, not just around scoping, but we have some ideas about how a MSP that has been validated, if you will, under the new rule and the new scoping could be found on the marketplace. And what kind of information gets shared on the marketplace about them? Because every MSP offers varying levels of services that would plug into 800-171, right? And so these are conversations that, we're drafting it right now on a lot of these important issues, but nothing has been submitted or shared. And we'd like to get feedback on it. We'd like to be able to share with our members when something is baked and we're moving forward, you have advanced knowledge of all of that. This is what we are now submitting. And so as one of our members who helped us in that, you are starting to navigate in a way that you feel can have more confidence of something our whole industry is going to be behind.
Yeah, that's something that is exciting, just because one of the things that I've learned in this industry, that I've learned it through just being in it, as well as from some painful experiences, is knowledge is critical. in this space, and it's not going to be solved by some technology. It's going to be solved by people knowing what they need to do and those people executing it at a high level. And so you've got to have connectivity with other people to see that insight, to see what's going on, to make sure that you're relevant and that you're doing the right thing for your clients, because there's just a lot of liability that you could go sideways on if you're not taking this responsibility serious.
Yeah, the liability is huge. And honestly, what I love about what you're saying is that the more educated you are, the more the conversations with the MSP vendor community are going to be like, wait a minute. Just because you're in the AWS government cloud actually doesn't mean that you're FedRAMP, right? And helping to educate the vendor community as well, because as you see, I know that I mean, we've talked about this, and it's shameful sometimes to walk through a vendor area at a conference and see how many people have CMMC or NIST 800-171 on their banner or their backdrop or their marketing, but you start talking to them and they have actually no clue what they offer that would align with CMMC, or they really believe that what they're doing is 100% legitimate, and it's going to put them in a world of liability and hurt, and it's going to mess up the MSPs and their clients big time. Yeah. So there has to be more education in the MSP community.
Absolutely. Joy, are there some points that you feel like perhaps we haven't covered that you want to highlight on before we end?
Yeah, I think that whether or not you want to join the collective, and by the way, the URL is the mspcollective.org. I actually said it wrong. It's mspcollective.org. Don't put the word "the" in front of there. But whether or not you join us officially, I think that the way that you approach this as an MSP, Bobby, is something that everyone should consider, because the CCP class, people are looking at it and going, oh, I'm going to hold off until the rule pass. I've heard that from multiple MSPs. No, I don't want to put somebody through that until the rule passes. And I'm like, you know, if you don't have that kind of knowledge right now, you're doing a disservice to your own clients in helping them get ready in a way that's meaningful.
For sure. Yeah. My knowledge has grown exponentially, but that course gave me such a good, solid foundation to start from. But I mean, that puts you in the parking lot of the race, right? You're there. Yeah. You can hear the cheers, but you still got to get on the course, and you really got to, there's a lot more work that needs to get done. And I think that knowledge gap is so critical to close. So you want to be in field goal range. I mean, it doesn't mean you got to be in the red zone, but or scored. But if you're not even in the zip code, you've got a lot of ground to make up, and it's just too much to make up to be relevant in the industry.
Well, even being able to understand what kind of contract things you could be helping your clients with, or the CUI markings, or, I mean, it's just such a broad foundational knowledge. And you took yours from Edwards, and I'm still teaching for Edwards Performance Solutions as a 1099. And, you know, I'm always delighted when I see that about 20% of the students are MSPs, sometimes maybe even a little bit more. But it's a teeny percentage of MSPs overall that have participated, that I hope will start to participate. And you and I don't make any money for referring people to Edwards Performance Solutions, but we both know that they've done an incredible job with their program and helping the MSP community.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the reality of that journey and what having that certification can be is massive as far as in how it can propel and get you going. Yeah. As an MSP, a 13-person MSP, I didn't have some large department that is just in compliance that I could say, hey, guys, go to Edwards and learn this stuff and come back. Like, I went as the CEO of the company because I wanted to see, is this the direction I want to go to steer myself? And the insight that course provided opened my eyes to the potential of what my company could look like if we participated in that space. But it was very evident that there was some serious knowledge gaps that I needed to try to close. And I think this initiative that you guys are doing is a key component to closing that gap. And if you're really serious about trying to get involved in in the MSP space as providing CMMC services, this seems like almost a no-brainer in my opinion. But that's just my perspective.
Well, thank you for talking through it with me, and I hope this is helpful to anybody that listens to this.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.